Good afternoon. My name is Elise Bigley, and I am the Director of Strategic Projects at the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, and I am pleased to open today's webinar. So let's get going. The Ag Policy Exchange webinar series offers a platform to dive into and explore diverse critical policy issues facing Canadian agriculture and food. These webinars and all of CAPI's work is only made possible thanks to the support of partners who understand that agriculture and agri-food can do more and that policy plays a critical role in unlocking the sector's potential. Today's webinar was funded by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada under the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnerships Agri-Competitiveness Program. We are also very pleased that this webinar is part of our ongoing partnership with Real Agriculture. Together, we are fostering meaningful dialogue on the opportunities and challenges facing the agri-food sector and reaching audiences across multiple platforms. For more information on upcoming content, you can visit realagriculture.com or CAPI's website and subscribe to our mailing list. You can also visit the new Real Ag Policy Hub, where you'll find columns, past and upcoming webinars, and other policy discussions. So make sure you sign up for the Ag Policy newsletter so you don't miss any of the content coming out of the CAPI and Real Ag partnership. Today's webinar is also presented in collaboration with the Canadian Standards Association Group. We're grateful to work with them and have a partnership with them to bring you this webinar on the future of soil health measurement in Canada and why standardization matters. As you all know, soil health underpins agricultural productivity, environmental sustainability, and long-term resilience in Canada's agri-food sector. However, progress in improving soil health remains uneven. This is in part due to regional variabilities in soils and production systems, as well as a lack of consistent measurement and reporting frameworks for soil health data. Today's webinar will highlight findings from the CSA Group's recent report, Standardization of Soil Health Measurement and Reporting. The report itself provides an overview of existing soil health measurement and reporting practices, identifies barriers and sector-wide challenges around soil health benchmarking and decision-making, and very importantly, proposes some solutions aimed at strengthening the collection and use of soil health data in Canada. And we're really looking forward to having our speakers today unpack this important topic. But before I pass things over to CSA Group to share more about the findings from their recent report, we'd like to hear from you. So there should be a poll on the screen, and we'd like to know your thoughts. So the question is, if you could address one challenge and one challenge only to advance soil health in Canada, what would it be? We have consistent measurement and reporting standards, access to affordable soil health testing, turning soil data into practical management decisions, increased investment in soil science and R&D and extension, greater awareness and adoption of soil health practices. And while the answers are coming in, I'd like to welcome you again to register for CAPI's 2026 Exchange Conference happening October 6th to 7th in Ottawa, the theme of which is Canadian Agri-Food in a Value-Added World. And if you register before the end of this week, you can still take advantage of our launch discount pricing and save up to 25% on registration costs. We also invite you to consider partnering with CAPI through sponsorship and help continue to bring leaders across the agri-food sector in Canada for these critical conversations. We'd also like to let you know of another upcoming CAPI and Real Ag webinar taking place next month that will explore the implications of the new ministerial policy statement that's expected to follow the annual FPT meetings in July in Halifax. And we're going to explore what it could mean for the next Ag policy framework. So stay tuned for more information and registration details in the coming weeks. So it looks like we have, in terms of the biggest barriers, we have a kind of a tie between consistent measurement and turning soil data into practice, but closely behind it is increased investment and greater awareness of soil health practices. So the reality of this is all these challenges are interconnected, but that is also what's encouraging, that none of these challenges exist in isolation. So better measurement supports better decision-making, stronger research supports adoption, and improved access to data helps producers manage their soil more effectively. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion, shedding light on how we can make progress across all of these areas. And thank you for submitting your responses to the poll. So today we will have Dr. Anna Maria Tomlinson and Dr. Asim Biswaz set the stage and share about CSA Group's recent report, Standardization of Soil Health Measurement and Reporting. Following their presentations, we will have a panel discussion moderated by Real Ag's Lindsay Smith to expand on the discussion. So Dr. Tomlinson serves as the Director of Strategic and Cross-Sector Programs within the Standards Division at CSA Group. She oversees the development of innovative standardization programs and has also led the successful establishment of CSA Group's newest standards development sector, agriculture and agri-food. Dr. Biswas is a professor and Canada Research Chair in Digital Agriculture at the School of Environmental Sciences at University of Guelph. His research advances data-driven soil health assessment, digital soil mapping, proximal and remote sensing, and precision agriculture to support sustainable and resilient agri-food systems. And with that, I will pass things over to Anna Maria and Asim.
Thank you so much, Elise, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be on this webinar today. So thank you so much for CAPI for hosting us. And it's a pleasure to be presenting alongside Dr. Biswas, who's been doing some fantastic research in collaboration with CSA Group. So I'm here to do a very short introduction before I pass things along to Dr. Biswas, who will have a lot more in-depth information on the research project that was just published on the topic of standardization and soil health. So if we go to the next slide, I'll introduce CSA Group very briefly. We're a standards development organization. We've been around for over 100 years. And our mission is to enhance the lives of Canadians through the advancement of standards in the public and private sectors. We're a leader in standards research, development, education, and advocacy, and the technical and management standards developed by our 11,000 plus members improve safety, health, the environment, and economic efficiency in Canada and beyond. Go to the next slide. CSA Group is a not-for-profit organization, and we are accredited by the Standards Council of Canada to develop national standards of Canada. But our members are truly the folks who are involved deeply in the development of our standards. So CSA Group staff do not hold the pen when it comes to standards development, but rather we work with technical committees of experts who are able to give their time, their expertise, and their knowledge and contribute to the development of consensus-based standards. We currently have over 14 different areas of focus, and agriculture and agri-food is the newest such sector that has been established at CSA Group. If we go to the next slide. Within the Standards Development Division, we have 4 pillars of activity. Standards development is our bread and butter, focusing on the advancement of standards to support safety, economic prosperity, and to support health and safety as well. Research is an arm within the Standards Division that helps us advance technical research to better understand different areas of technology and to provide our technical committees with information for them to be able to develop stronger, more robust standards. We have an education department that's focused on the development of training programs and educational tools to enable the application of our standards across different industries. And we conduct a broad range of advocacy activities to raise awareness about the standards that we produce. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to jump a little bit into the agriculture and agri-food sector and give you a sense of the kind of work that we're advancing within this space. So if we go to the next slide, our role within the agriculture and agri-food sector is to support resilient, competitive, and environmentally responsible agriculture and agri-food practices. And we're focused on 3 main pillars of activity. The first is data and digitization, so facilitating the use of data and digitization to improve efficiency and sustainability. We also work in the area of sustainability and circularity to improve sustainability and circularity within the sector. And we tackle safety by advancing safety right across the sector to ensure that, or to help ensure that workers don't sustain injuries as they're advancing their activities. So if we go into the next slide, I'm going to jump into the sustainability and circularity pillar, because this is where we have initiated our substantial amount of work in the area of soil health. But just as an indication, our sustainability and circularity pillar also includes things like climate smart genomics, food loss and waste reduction, regenerative agriculture, and sustainable finance. In the area of soil health, if we go to the next slide, the key question to focus on here is, why did we decide to focus on soil health as a key topic of standardization? And really, it's focusing on the soil health being the capacity of soil to function as a living system, one that supports plant growth, sustains biological productivity, and protects environmental quality. It's really a core indicator of how sustainable our agricultural practices are. We know that healthy soils are central to sustainable food production and food security, climate resilience, and biodiversity protection. And of course, soil health is now a key priority across federal and provincial governments in Canada. So to bring it home, a national strategy for soil health is now being developed in response to the Senate's Critical Ground Report and Bill S-230. And this gives us a clear mandate and a real opportunity to act. And it sets up everything we'll cover in the rest of the presentation. If we go to the next slide, when we're looking at whether our soils are healthy, this is truly a difficult question to answer. And what we found through our early engagement with subject matter experts in the field is that there are 4 areas of uncertainty that are creating difficulties in being able to confidently determine whether a soil is healthy. First of all, a lack of consensus around soil health definitions. Secondly, uncertainty in soil health measurement practices, inconsistency in soil health data reporting and benchmarking, as well as uncertainty in how to account for variability in land use and farming practices. And so we asked ourselves, are standards needed to provide consistency, clarity, and support higher quality soil health data? So we commissioned a research report, and if we go to the next slide, we began to work with Dr. Asim Biswas and his team at Soil Tech to really determine what opportunities exist for standardization in the area of soil health data generation and management. And so I'll leave it there because I know that Dr. Biswas has a very in-depth presentation that goes over the scope and core objectives of the research as well as the findings. But if we go to the next slide briefly, I'll just highlight that in addition to the research report, we also have a number of standardization projects underway. So that includes soil health sampling and handling, soil health reporting, and soil health measurement and reporting framework. And we're also very engaged with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and the Soil Conservation Council of Canada in order to support them as they're developing Canada's national soil health strategy. So I'll leave it there and I'll pass it along to Dr. Biswas to walk you through our research report.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. Thank you, everybody. It's a nice opportunity to give a quick overview of the report. Again, is on behalf of CSA Standard Research, I'm going to give a quick introduction on the methodology that we followed, results we obtained, and the recommendation we observed from, or we derived from the data we collected. So myself, Asim Biswas, on behalf of the Soil Tech team, I'm also a professor at the University of Guelph, working in the soil health area. So from the introduction, can I get to the next slide? So before I go, I know Ana Maria talked about why we need to do the soil health measurement standardization of the soil health measurement, as well as the reporting. So again, it is a central productivity for the climate and water goals. It is treated as a living system, not just as a growth media. So yet the measurement and reporting lack system level harmonization, both in Canada and internationally. But a lot of our focus in this presentation will be for Canada. So what we observe that labs are internally consistent, but differ in their indicators, sampling, methods, report formats, limiting the comparability across lab regions and jurisdiction when you go there. So despite this critical importance, the measurement and reporting practices lack that system level standardization in Canada as we go through the internationally as well. Can I go to the next slide, please? So again, directly getting into the project, we established 3 different objectives. We really wanted to assess what are the measurement methods being currently used. We evaluate the current sampling protocol, analytical methods, assessment framework across Canada, different labs, and the research practices we are following. Then we wanted to evaluate how we are reporting that data, how the labs, governments, and service provider report and communicate soil health. And finally, what we wanted to see what are the priority areas or what are the gaps where we have current day in the measurement and the standard and in the reporting aspect, and pinpoint some of the standardization gaps in this area. Can I have the next slide? So directly digging into the methodology, we used a multi-method approach. So first we wanted to take a look about the global literature and the literature in Canada. We went through a systematic approach using Web of Science, Google Scholar, and many other other media to collect data, anything about soil health, measurement, assessment, indicator, reporting. We screen those data and analyze those. Then we went through the websites of different labs. So web-based lab analysis, we identified 37 accredited soil testing labs, profile for location, accreditation, analytical capacity, and the reporting format. We identified them and screened through the website and the documentation available. Then we created a survey. We reached out to the phone call and the survey to the different commercial lab, providing services for soil health measurement on their operation, methods, QA/QC, and the reporting practices as well. So, and finally, what we did, not only that service providers, but we wanted to reach out to the general community and the practitioners, what other people are thinking. We interviewed, we were able to get 35 experts across Canada from researcher, government, extension, and nonprofit on their satisfaction, barrier, and priorities. Can I go to the next slide? So for the evidence-based as a glance, so when we looked at that 37 laboratories we profiled, 44 in the total, but then some lab had the multiple location, 10 lab directly surveyed between August and October 2025 last year, 35 practitioner interviewed, and over 400 soil parameters across 218 methods we identified and collected data. So who are our interviews are like about 91% or more than 90% over 6 years or more experience, 71% hold doctoral degrees. So a lot of this academic and the government researcher we find, 54% academic researcher balance, and the rest are balanced between the government extension and not-profit respondents. Next slide, we really looked at what the measurement methods. We looked at biological, chemical, and physical method, as well as the newer dimension of measurement using sensors. We try to take a look how each of these category we are working through. So again, I'm not going through in details, but all the different methods available in the literature and currently being provided as service provided by the service provider or commercial labs, we documented everything out there. Next slide, please. So for the sampling protocol, we also reviewed like sampling design, what time the sampling being done, what depth, whether we are compositing or taking an individual sample, sample handling, as well as QA/QC in all different aspects. We looked at in terms of a sampling data collection, how we are working through. In terms of the framework, so we looked at what are the framework available in Canada and again in US as well, in down south, what are the different frameworks being used, including SHAS, Saskatchewan Soil Health Assessment, Saskatchewan Assessment of Soil Health, and then Cornell Soil Health, which is CASH, Henny Soil Health, Soil Management Assessment Framework. Then we looked at the Living Lab approach that AFC is following, as well as the minimum data set requirement and some of the other practices in different framework that being followed. So with this, can I go to the next slide, please? We're really getting into what we observe, just to give a brief overview, not to go through more detail. So first we looked at the lab landscape. What are the labs that we are able to find through the web-based survey? We looked at the majority of the lab in Ontario we observed, but again, this is what all the labs that we are able to find and go get the data through. Again, there is a clear uneven geographical distribution. Tracks the agricultural intensity as we observe, like Ontario, BC, Alberta dominate, but Atlantic provinces only have 1 to 2 facilities each. But again, just to be a caution of this data, that the number of labs is not equal to the access of these lab services. The reason is that we have seen a lot of prairie samples are being shipped to the down south across the border to get services, especially the prairies. We looked at that. But again, in this data set, we did not include those. We are really looking at the geographical location of actual service provision or the labs. Can I go to the next slide, please? So in terms of the type of analysis being considered or service provisions done, mostly we look at the very strong chemistry focus, a lot of chemical, almost everybody does the chemical properties, physical properties, some biological testing that start to go in, but we did find a little bit of deficit on the biological side compared to the physical and chemical side. Some biological assays lag and lag international best practices as well. And biology drives nutrient cycling and the organic matter dynamics, the core of the soil health. But many of the analysis, we did not find a good report of biological soil health assessment being reported in these cases. Can I go to the next slide, please? In terms of the instrumentation and quality assurance, we also wanted to see what being done. And again, most commonly, as we all know, the ICP-MS or mass spec is being most frequently used, like 320 times uses. Multi-elemental analysis can be done with that, followed by ion chromatography and AAS, colorimetry, as well as AAS done in most of the laboratory, in line with the global trends. Again, nothing new in this case, but again, this raises the cost that everybody have to pay to get that services. When you look at the quality assurance, it's at the mature level within the lab. Most of the labs, are about 50%, half of the lab are either ISO or IC 17025 compliant. Some of the cases are inter-lab checks are also done. But some of the other labs, they use this SCC, CALA, or ANAB accreditation. Within the lab is strong, but the gap remains at the system level. When you look at a national scale, we did find the gap in terms of the following procedures and accreditations. Can I go to the next slide, please? So when you look at the user's perspective, so we found that low satisfaction with the current options. So somewhat satisfied, about 30%. So 37% we looked at somewhat overall satisfied. Only 6% was very satisfied. The reason we thought, or we found it when you look at the causes, people mentioned, or the respondent mentioned, that poor interpretation or recommendation available, which you have seen today in the first survey, interlab method differences as well, and hard to understand the result. That interpretation of the result for the need of for my purposes is one of the major gap we did find. That we felt like that tended to the low satisfaction with the current options available to any user. Next slide, please. So when you look at the barriers, we wanted to identify as many, but again, there could be beyond those numbers of barriers we identified. In many cases, people can identify multiple barriers. So one of the major top three barriers we found: the standardization, the cost, and the unclear economic benefit. These tend to restrict like how we are testing soil, because the soil data, even in the soil health policy or strategy, we're looking at one of the pillars about the soil data. So we felt like this is clearly translating to that gap or aspect of the soil health strategy. So point where the intervention pays off first, this is one of the gap. And when an user look at that, beside the cost and unclear economic benefit, some of the awareness about the test, what it can provide to me, or limited the lab capacity, what it can provide to me in terms of the resources or in terms of the data, as well as insufficient expertise to actually translate that data into action. And the regional variability was also observed as a barrier to adoption. Next slide, please. So when you look at what it means in terms of going forward, we found that from the survey result, there's a strong appetite for standardization. About 86% say standardization is important. 97% value the regional adoption of the standardization. So that means every region could actually provide a different kind of information. And 83% want local reference value so that they can compare with the next, and 77% want soil crop yield linkage. It's not that in silos, the data set we mentioned. And I think as we define soil health, many of the definition is just the perspective that soil health being tested. So that means in this case, if we think about the crop yield is a measure, how do we link that soil health data to the crop yield? The priority for standardization, we observe like an indicator selection is one and important, because when you go through the soil health indicator, it's a huge number of indicators we can categorize in each of those. Sampling protocol, the lab method standardization, data interpretation, quality control, and some sort of training and certification or use of those resources and the knowledge gap and the reporting format that could be easily translated. Can I go to the next slide, please? On a gap towards a minimum data set. Nope, just another one before. Yeah, towards the minimum data set, we did observe this is a requirement because when you're getting a large number of data, it's sensitive response to the management within meaningful time scale, some diagnostically identifiable, and the low variability or identifiable, as well as the practical, cost-effective way for the available method. Regional adoption was identified as an essential. We looked at about 12 or 15 indicators needed to separate scoring for the coarse and fine soil. So this is one of the example that why we needed a minimum data set. Can I go to the next slide, please? So in terms of a recommendation, as you observed, like when you synthesize all the results from 4 different data sets that we collected, the web-based, the literature, the web-based information, the data, a survey with the service provider and the general practitioner, we found that core soil health indicator suite were coming up as one of this critical one that we need a standardization for. So we propose something like a tiered approach about how many of indicators to be identified or measured in a tier 1, like a minimum core that could actually talk about the current status of the soil, as well as tier 2 and tier 3. Some of the optional and more advanced analysis could be included in there. This was identified as a critical recommendation for developing standardization in that core soil health indicator suite. Can I go to the next? Yeah, so in the recommendation 2 and 3 are also identified as a critical. So one of those was a harmonized protocol as well as the regional calibration. So protocol for sampling, sample handling, and analytical protocol that could be included in there. So building a standardization for how we collect, how we handle, how we measure, and how we report. That's probably one of the critical important we found, as well as that calibration or the regional calibration is necessary and setting up the reference value. Many different parameters when you observe and different parts of Canada being considered differently. How do we come up to that regionally standard or regionally reference values? This is some of the recommendation we are able to come out from the answers from the survey. Can I go to the next? So recommendation 4, 5, and 6, it's a high to medium and high level recommendation. We provided interpretation and the reporting framework so that we can follow, and then anybody could see a report that could be translated and they will understand what it's saying. So that framework could be another domain of standardization, plus the data structure, metadata, and interoperability as we go forward and try to connect to the other agencies and other organizations, even beyond within Canada, internationally. If we want to go, how do we create a data structure with the metadata and other information that we can follow a FAIR principle and create that interoperable system. And a medium recommendation, because we are really categorizing based on the most critical to the medium, so training, implementation, and the support. So really creating that system, how do you go towards that support system? With the next slide, and that should be the second last. And if you want to create a framework, how each of those standardization approach could be coming in. So again, standardization, the capacity building, federal provincial relationship, and economic and incentives to support that measurement framework or measurement and reporting framework, we should say, outreach, education, demonstration, and infrastructure and data management. With this, I will stand on to the last slide, and that will be my key takeaways. Is the science is ready, but the system may not be. So as we observed with the data and the literature, labs are individually rigorous, but indicator sampling, interpretation, and reporting are not harmonized. Close the biological gap. That's another we're really looking at is central to soil health, but we're not doing across widely. Standardize nationally, calibrate regionally. That's one of the suggestions we want to go. And 6 priority standard. With this, I will stop speaking here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asim, and thank you, Anna Maria, of course, for introducing this important topic and covering the research that is highlighted in the research report as well. We're going to bring in now two more important voices for this conversation for our panel. We've got Susie Miller and Dr. Jeff Shano. Susie Miller is the Acting Director of the Soil Conservation Council of Canada and the Executive Director of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Crops. She has more than 30 years of experience in agricultural policy and industry leadership. And Dr. Jeff Shano is a professor of soil fertility and professional agrologist who works in the Department of Soil Science at the University of Saskatchewan. He holds the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture Soil Nutrient Management Chair in the College of Agriculture and Bioresources. Welcome here, Susie and Jeff. We will, in just a moment, also bring back Anna Maria and Asim to ask more questions, and of course do want to invite participants to drop their questions in the Q&A as well. Dr. Shano, I'll maybe start with you. In hearing, in looking at this overview, one of the things I think that really sticks out to me is we are trying to standardize something of a very complex question, and that is of soil health. Walk me through it. What's the difference between soil quality and soil health?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I guess in over 30 years of employing these kinds of measurements in various research applications, back in the old days we called it soil quality. Well, especially when we were looking at things like the impact of no-till on soils in the Canadian prairies, and that has evolved into the use of the terminology soil health. But really, the kinds of things that you measure are very similar. The chemical parameters, the physical and the biological ones, and indeed they're very complex. And together they interact to influence this soil health, which we like to link, particularly in agriculture, and I myself as a farmer as well, to productivity. And yeah, it's challenging. It can be hard to get your head around sometimes, Lindsay.
Absolutely. Okay. Now, Susie, from your perspective, this question is of trying to standardize testing for soil health. Why is it so important that we have standardization in this space?
Um, Thank you, Lindsay. I guess what I will provide is what we have heard from the many stakeholders that we have already consulted with on the National Agricultural Soil Health Strategy. When we first went out, we had the extension, we research, incentives. We didn't have data and measurement, and we were surprised. Didn't matter which group we talked to, whether it was the researchers, the soil conservation associations, the farm groups, the conservation NGOs, federal, provincial governments, they all said data and measurement is important. So before we know how to fix the problem, or before we explore how to fix the problem, we really need to know and understand what the problem is. So data and measurement is important, and standardization is one of the tools to be able to enhance the availability, the relevance, the effectiveness of soil measurement tools. So, that's where we're starting.
Now, there's some great questions that have been popped into the Q&A, and we're going to get to some of those. And no surprise, I think Jay Wetter is thinking along the lines that I am as well. I will ask that question of Asim, but Jeff, I'll go to you on this one. More broadly speaking, one of the things I think that's been pointed out is we're pretty good, at measuring things like pH and the chemical makeup of a soil, but that question of the biological component of the soil is I think anyway, a pretty large gap. Where do you think we're at in testing for that? Why are we maybe not where we need to be on that one?
Yeah, the biological component is very important. It's dynamic, and we need to look at dynamic aspects of the soil, what's going on, and that includes the microorganisms that are in the soil and the very important processes that they carry out, like releasing available nutrients, carrying out respiration, and there's different ways to measure those. And I think there's probably really been less attempt to standardize that because some of those assessments, particularly using molecular techniques to look at the composition of the microflora in the soil, are relatively new. I think back to available nutrient assessment in the soils, that's been around for a long time. And because of that, there's been, I think, more standardization in that, and I think a lot more effort and success in interpretation of that. The biological assessments do tend, by their very nature, more variable in their measurement, more sensitive to environmental conditions, more sensitive to sample, where you take it from, how you handle it, and also in how you interpret those as well. It's really not been, I think, researched as much in terms of interpretation. What does this mean? Or modeled in the sense of making a prediction as to what that assessment translates to for some type of a productivity type of rating or assessment.
I think
And if I could follow up,
yeah, go ahead, Susie.
Lindsay, on
Yes,
that
please.
one. When we've had discussions with farmers and we talk about soil testing, they really want to know, that their approach is, what does it mean? And so soil testing that is instigated by farmers, not researchers, but farmers, is related to their economic activity. And where they see the benefit is in those minerals, NPK, because it can make a difference in their costs, how much they apply. So that's not all farmers, but that if we looked at the motivation, they understand those results, they understand the direct applicability, but as Dr. Shono indicated, there hasn't been that same cause and effect demonstration within the biological sphere.
I think there are definitely questions about it, that's for sure. Okay, so let's bring in Anna Maria and Asim as well, and I'll ask the rest of Jay's question to you, Asim. It says 37%. You list in your slides satisfaction level in the soil test lab system. But that, of course, when we think about the group that you asked, that's what they mentioned. Was there, or did you ask those that are using those services, like agronomists or growers, how they sort of felt about the satisfaction level?
Okay, just to be corrected, this is not the lab satisfaction. This is the user satisfaction. So we looked at, this is the 35 respondent we looked at across academia, research, government, and the practitioner. So the satisfaction level we looked at, very satisfied 6%, somewhat satisfied 31%, but there's a dissatisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, some remain neutral, and no opinion as well. So that's 37% not come from a lab satisfaction, but it is the user satisfaction on the testing options available to them.
And Anna Maria, jump in here if you would like to as well. But Asim, there's a somewhat related question, but there is a question on the different types of tests that were assessed, or at least brought up in this. And there's a question about the SHAP testing. There's Ontario, there's BC. How did you decide sort of which? You had one slide there that had sort of different assessment protocols. How did you decide which ones to include or which ones not to include?
So we did take a look. All of this SHAP is included in there, but I was just highlighting 6 of those protocols like out there along the cache and others. But SHAP is already there because in Ontario we have been following that.
Okay.
So in the report, detailed report, we have all those protocols that we explored, including SHAP.
Okay. Anna Maria, from your perspective, what was maybe most surprising in putting this together, as far as where some of the gaps are in what we need before we really can say that we can standardize soil health testing?
Yeah, I think what was very surprising to us at CSA, there were a couple of things. Number one is understanding that when it comes to the analytical methods, those are well standardized. So we looked at, ISO. ISO has over 200 standards on soil health, and many of those standards are on analytical methods, and those are being used in the labs. The interesting thing was that it's actually the inconsistency between labs in terms of what is actually being tested for. And what does that complete picture of soil health look like? Are you actually getting that minimum set of data that Asim was discussing in his presentation to be able to make decisions on what to do to either improve your soil health or continue what you're doing if you're doing a really great job, right? Like everyone's interested in that actionable direction, right? You want to be able to use that data for something to generate, better revenues, whether it's in the short term, medium term, or long term, right? So how complete is your data set? That's where we're seeing a lot of discrepancy. And maybe the third thing that I'll highlight is in our very first meeting of the research advisory panel, because this project was completed with the support of additional experts in the field. We spent, I think, an hour discussing what is soil health and how are we defining this. So that to me was striking, that we don't have a very complete definition or agreed upon definition for soil health to begin with, to be able to have, to build further conversations on top of that. So all of those pieces to me, when thinking about data, right? If you want to have really good quality data, you have to be very buttoned up on these types of questions.
Mm-hmm. Susie, there is the question of why do we need a definition of soil health? Why do we need a standardized way to test it? Where do you see if we can answer that question, if we can define soil health and we can then measure it, how do you see that being used? Where do we go with it if we can actually achieve this?
There's a couple of aspects. When we started our discussions with stakeholders on the soil health strategy, the first thing we did in our small group of experts, I'm not an expert, but there were some around the table, as we took a look at what definition of soil health we could use. And we settled on kind of a more general one, because we realized we could spend the next 2 years talking about what the definition of soil health is and not get any work done. I think that where it is important and where it is relevant is in the context of some of these systems. Soil health may mean different things to different farmers, depending on what they're using the soil for, depending on the type of soil, depending on their farming system. Some things may be possible when you're dealing with organic, and some may be possible when you're using convention, and they aren't necessarily combined. The thing like soil carbon, the capacity will vary across the country. And so there are many variables in terms of the utilization. But if I take a look at the work that Anna Maria has led, the idea of data and knowledge as the mechanism for standardization, or as the focus for standardization, I think is a win-win for everybody, including the practitioners of soil health measurement, the researchers, the users. So it's the same as what is regenerative, right? And CSA is going there, which is great for you. But where is it important in the context of enhancing, improving soil health? And I think that is those standards are particular in the data and measurement sphere.
So, Jeff and Paul's got a great question here, and we've touched on a little bit about a standard soil test for, say, nutrients and pH, etc. It's a relatively easy thought process of here's the value of doing a soil test. Doesn't mean everybody uses them. We know that, but it's a relatively straight line of here's the nutrients that are there. Here's your pH. You might want to correct that. But we're talking about measuring, and I think there is a real ask within the farming community of what else can I learn from a soil test for sure. Um, but Paul's question is, that soil health must create a value proposition for farmers. So how do you see having a standardized way to quantify soil health actually serving farmers? What is that value proposition?
Yeah, I think that's a good question and an important concern. And I guess I would think about it from the standpoint of that soil health assessment being a kind of benchmark for a grower. And then as they adopt new different management practices, that they're able to use that and use the soil health assessment in following years over time to determine how that particular management practice has influenced their soil health and ultimately how that translates to productivity. So I think that's a very important part of it from the grower standpoint. I guess as a grower also looks at policy development by government, that they would see the information that's coming out collectively being put together to develop policy that's also going to be meaningful and helpful to growers and society in general.
Mm-hmm. Stephanie's got a great question. And may I say, everyone on this webinar, fantastic turnout in the Q&A. I am so excited about this. We're going to try to get to as many of them as we can because they're great, and I'm so glad that people are participating. So Stephanie asks, how will the national soil health standardization efforts consider the research frameworks and initiatives that have already occurred throughout Canada? Anna Maria, maybe I'll go to you on this one. Highlighting, of course, other work that provinces have done, individual groups have done. How do you see all of this sort of being put together into a larger picture?
Great question. And, we think of standards as knowledge mobilization tools. So the idea is to work very closely with the research community, with subject matter experts, to be able to bring all of the knowledge and the information that already exists into an agreed process, an agreed methodology and way of doing things. So for example, if we have, very good information from, research centers across Canada on, here, these are the indicators, here, these are the core indicators that you must have, that can be brought into the standard development process. And, when we develop standards, we establish technical committees of experts with representations from, growers, from government, from, science and academia and from labs, right? So everyone would have an opportunity to contribute to the development of the standard and to bring their own knowledge and expertise into the process. So all of that gets considered at the technical committee table. And through that consensus building process, we can arrive to a set of criteria or requirements that are agreeable to all of the groups represented around the table and are, not placing any undue burden on anyone and are reasonably achievable. So that's really what we're aiming for as part of standardization. And we always work very closely with research associations and academia to make sure that our standards are informed by the latest available data.
Yeah.
Okay.
It would be
Sure, go
great
ahead.
to be able to see all of this data brought together in the various soil information systems that exist both provincially and nationally as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, Jeff, that's a very good point because I think, when we're talking about the value of soil health data and what can farmers truly get out of this, I think the more data that we have, the more that we can take advantage of more sophisticated kind of analytics that require, larger sets of data to generate, indications or recommendations. So I think enabling the generation of data that's consistent and comparable so that hey, I live in this region and I farm this type of crop and I have this type of soil. What might a healthy soil look like, that is directly comparable to my situation, and what might some of the things that work really well in this scenario be, right? So there's an opportunity here for farmers to learn from each other and to leverage larger data sets for more informed decision making. That's truly the power of high quality data.
I wonder, Lindsay, if I could kind of make a sideways move, and also it responds to one of the questions that are in the chat. Would there be any benefit to creating North American-wide standardization? So I'm going to talk about collaborations, and I am going to put in a plug because next week is the Canadian Society of Soil Science Conference in Guelph, and the Soil Conservation Council of Canada has a session on collaborations, and it's in three parts. The first part are panelists talking about various collaborations, because what Anna Maria is talking about is actually a collaboration with decisions on how we can come to a common agreement on those things that are most important, leave those things that aren't going to make a difference. Then we're going to have a workshop, and part of that workshop is what are the barriers? And then we're going to have a case study. And the case study is, can we have a Canada-US? It's going to have a discussion. The reason we're having that is to identify what are barriers to collaboration. What are the things that we have to break down? And it's really interesting in terms of data and measurement standardization, because it has been identified as a barrier, a significant barrier, whether it's research collaboration, whether it's extension, but it's also been identified as a primary goal of things that we need to improve. So it's circular in a way. And what I see, the benefit, one of the side benefits of developing these standards is who you get being on, what do you call them, the technical committees, is who you talk to and the points of view. So the process itself has so much value that, I mean, I'm not going to say even if nobody used the standard, obviously we want that standard used. But that conversation, that discussion, that identification of what is really important has a lot of ongoing benefits outside of the standard sphere, because everybody involved in that, and Anna Maria talked about, kind of various expertise that comes in, they bring that back to their own sphere of influence. And so they become, if not advocates for a particular standard, they become advocates for discussions on standardization, which I think is amazing.
Okay, so there's a few technical questions I want to get to, and then one of them sort of brings us back to exactly this conversation. But Asim, Angela asked, can you comment on why soil organic carbon was selected as a measurement over soil organic matter as a minimum core indicator?
I think the question are coming up like when you're identifying SOC versus SOM, again, the measurement wise, some of the lab and the consistent quality of the data between SOC and SOM, even some of the lab providing an SOM measurement and then converting into SOC, or some are providing SOC, which are more expensive and then converting into SOM. So based on the data set we collected, SOC tend to come up a little bit more common. That's what we identified and included in the minimum set rather than an SOM itself.
Okay. Angela, I hope that's a good enough answer. If not, drop some things in the chat or in the Q&A. Okay, and from a standardization perspective, is it better to use an indicator that may be less sensitive but highly reproducible across labs, or one that provides more biological insight? I think this is actually, it's more variable, but provides more insight. This is a really key question, I think, on the standardization side, Asim, is do we want something that no matter what lab I go to, I get a consistent result, or do we want something that informs more?
I think this is something was coming up, like why do you need to standardize even following a protocol between the labs? So that means if you want to confidently say that every lab will give me the same data set for a particular property, that's what we needed, a consistent measurement protocol. So again, even we know that minimum of mishandling of the samples or just the way we collect soil sample from the lab, that could change the whole aspect of it. So considering all those coming up, even the measurement, we do have many different, like when we send some samples to multiple labs, we tend to have a little bit of different variations as well. Then coming to Angie's other question about whether that 10% and 90% accuracy, I think Angie or I saw another question.
Yeah.
So again, that the error, what is the threshold level of error that we can actually include there? So if we have a consistent measurement protocol defined for different lab, then we know that when we are reproducing that test following the same protocol, then we know that this will be coming in.
And I would say to pick a measurement that has the most relevance across a wide variety of management systems, regions, I think is very, very important as well in the overall consideration of what are the key soil health measurements that we want to have as our baselines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think sorry, Lindsay, I just wanted to
yeah, go
add
ahead,
to
Asim.
Jeff's
Yep.
comment that when we looked at these responses, yes, there is overwhelming response. We need a standardization, but there's a very strong that how do you actually contextualize and how do you create a regional variation, regional inclusion of that. So when I was finding out which one to be the top, again, there is a large number, majority, almost all the respondent to other question, we do have extension and outreach professional and not-profit and NGO, but particularly I'm not able to categorize all the number of farmers or practitioners out there, but we do have a category of different folks responding out of that 35 responses. And again, it could be biased based on the sample data collected, the responses we're looking at based on the data set we collected. And it may be a misrepresentation that we did not get to every possible stakeholders in this case. And it is true because we couldn't go to everybody and get a response. But based on the responses, when you look at the regional variability and the regional validation of the standard was coming up pretty strong as well. So we need a standard, but we also need the regional validation of that standard, which basically going back and contextualize for the region, for the need, and for the soil type that we're talking about.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the additional nuance that I would emphasize is that, it's one thing to choose the methodology, but I think, when we're looking at the recommendations from the research, it's all about what are those potential sources of error or potential sources of like data insufficiency. So one is like the reporting. Are you reporting it in the right way with the right metadata to provide all of the context? And then how are you doing all the sampling? How's the sample being handled so that you're not introducing errors, before you even get to the lab? So like those are just some ways to reduce that amount of error, that amount of potential variability.
So, Jeff, this question, and Henry posts a really good comment. We do have definitions of a healthy soil, but we also have, to Anna Maria's point, we have an incredible range of soils that are out there. Some of them are not suitable for crop production. Other ones are absolute powerhouses. But just because a soil is, say, sandier, doesn't mean it is somehow less healthy than maybe a beautiful mellow loam.
Yeah.
It's just different. So we have some of those tried and true sort of specific quality parameters, but we're trying to standardize soil health. So how do we mesh the two of those? Because some of these things are universal and some are not.
Absolutely. And I can think of where I farm, and there are what are called solonetzic soils that developed and in their natural state have a restricted rooting zone because of this area of high density in the soil profile caused by sodium dispersion of soil colloids, clays during soil development. And so, I mean, if you looked at the density of that soil, you would say, yeah, that's certainly a restriction on root growth. And you might say, well, you would never want to say that's an unhealthy soil in the sense that that was the way it formed. That's what you got. And so always it needs to be considered in the context of what's out there and maybe what we might be able to do to overcome that limitation. And I think that's really where the agronomists, the extension people really come in as a valuable way of making the most use of this data in conjunction with the growers to actually look at it in context and also look at how they might improve what already exists there. So yeah, it's a struggle because as you say, I mean, you can be on a marginal soil and it was always marginal, and maybe it's always going to have those limitations, but can you really say that it's an unhealthy soil?
Yes. This is one of my questions, I guess, Jeff. And so and Susie, there's the next step of all this, I suppose, and I want to leave us time to sort of talk about how any of this information integrates itself into an actual strategy and where we see a fit and maybe some of the challenges and pitfalls to that. But Asim, from your perspective in putting this research together, in getting feedback from the labs and from those who are involved in this, like it's one thing to say like there are regional differences, but it's another to really, funnel down into what are the specific things and as we mentioned earlier, the different types of tests and assessments we can make that actually translate to soil health. Because often, the field level, farm level measurement is, did it yield well or not based on what I put into it. So are we are we sort of getting ahead of ourselves? Are we asking too much of these soil health assessments in that there still needs to be a way to measure the performance of these soils in some way? Are we trying to measure too many things?
I think this is what, like I did mention, and even in the survey, we found out the contextualize that to the need or the purpose. So fit to the purpose, this is something else as well. Now, when you're looking at, yes, regional validation, if you want a national strategy, a national standard that needs to be validated regionally. But again, when you come down to a farm level, what I really want to do is this fit for the purpose that I'm going to grow this year. So this is at a different level, we observe the different responses, and again, from the soil science research and the research community, we have been seeing that as we change the scale, the priority of that changes as well. So, like in terms of the measurement and others, I think at the end of the day, if we think about the field level responses and looking at what I'm going to grow and how my soil is going to respond, it is that farm level response and how I manage that as well. But again, when you try to do that, measurement will be done at that farm level. So how do you measure it? How do you create that a standardized approach to measure so that everybody is measuring and putting into the same scale of that um, in the measurement unit, but again, contextualized for the application of it.
So, okay, so Susie, how then do we see a standardized test or tests for soil health? If we can standardize that measurement, account for the regional variability, how does that fit into the agriculture soil health strategy for Canada?
Okay, so this is the way we have looked at it from the beginning and continue. And I use collaboration, but that's what it is. It is how do we work together to identify the gaps, identify the best um, um, initiatives that are out there, support those, find ways to fill those gaps by working together. So when we started out, as I indicated earlier, data and measurement was not as high on our radar, it definitely is now. And so we have 4 subcommittees we're bringing together expertise, and everybody that's on this call, there are many on the call that are already part of the process or have indicated their interest, but we're also inviting anybody else. So those 4 subcommittees will sit down over a 3-month period, a kind of intense period, and with support from the Soil Conservation Council of Canada, the other working group members, and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada will actually put together what are those gaps, what are the priorities, what are the things that others are doing to bring in. And so we have research, extension, we have measurement, and we have incentives. They're not mutually exclusive. As Jeff indicated, you need the agronomist to be able to take the research knowledge and turn it into, sort of on the ground relevance. But the data and measurement is going to look at these things. What is going on? How can we help CSA and its partners get to where they need to go? What are the gaps? What are some approaches? This strategy is not going to be able to undertake all of the initiatives. Maybe we can undertake some, but we are going to point to, on an ongoing basis, point to those things that have value in terms of research, extension, data and measurement, and the incentives. And so this fits very well into the work that we're doing. Not only do we have a volunteer from CSA as a member of our working group, all of the working group members have had a presentation and discussion on the work that CSA has undertaken. And we also have, how do you say, crossover in terms of the people that are on our working group and those that are on Anna Maria's various committees. So is that helpful? Is that kind of what you were looking for, Lindsay?
Yes, although Zoom also just crashed for me. So glad everybody's still here and it didn't crash for everyone else. But that's live for you. So there you go. We'll roll with it. So I think for my own question, I suppose, building on that is, we know that like the Senate has put this forward that, we need this national soil health strategy. My question is why? Why do we need it? Jeff, maybe I'll go to you first and then Susie, and then would love to hear from the others as well. But what is the value proposition here that we're putting to Canadians and most importantly to farmers of why we need this?
I think there's a lot of interest and a lot of interest that comes from government, also industry, and looking at ways that we can verify that the agricultural practices that go on in Canada are sustainable and contributing to a sustained or improved quality of the soil resource. And I think that's to the benefit of everyone and in Canadian society. So I think that's why it's important in a broader sense, Lindsay, and to recognize that and to bring it forward, and it's as much as awareness and education, and to kind of turn it from a bit of a mix mash of a sort of a feel good thing, and which is sometimes some people say, well, what is this? It's just a feel good, into something that's actually quantifiable and defensible in terms of its scientific merit and its value to producers, industry, and society in general.
Susie, from your perspective?
I'm going to focus on the standardization part of it because that's kind of what we're talking about today. And it is a tool. It is a valuable tool. And it is one that has been identified through the work that Dr. Biswas has undertaken, that it has relevance all across the spectrum. And we can do something about it. And I think that's one of the things that we kept hearing when we talked to people about doing a national strategy and the various components of it is focus on achievables. And this is one area. Standards have been a proven tool. It takes time and it takes effort to get them right, but they're a tool. And in the same way as extension is a tool, resources and incentives are a tool. And so, I see this as an integral part of the work that we're trying to achieve through, a national collaboration of those that are actively involved in soil health. There's so many, like Dr. Shono is one of the primary soil health researchers across Canada, and he has a number of colleagues that have devoted their whole career to doing this. We have extension people, we have farmers that are on the leading edge. and we're doing it for them. And it's incumbent upon us in a time of limited resources that we actually take all of this and put it to, I know I'm sounding altruistic here, the better good, but but that's what we're trying to do. And there's a lot of work done out there between a lot of people. And if we can add value by bringing more of those people together and identifying where we can make incremental advances, then we will have achieved what we set out to achieve.
Anna Maria, let's in that same question is exactly that, how data and standardization make something like that possible, that farmers actually have something, a test that they can count on and can use to make decisions.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what it is, right? Standards, as Susie put it, they're a tool to generate better data. And really, what is everyone trying to achieve here when we're talking about soil health? It's long-term sustainability, the ability to produce food long-term to reduce vulnerabilities to climate change and to achieve that food security goal that Canada has now adopted. If Canada wants to be, self-sustaining in terms of food production and also help feed the world, we need to take care of our soils. We need to make sure that we're maintaining them over time and being able to determine like, hey, how's my soil doing? That's an important question to be able to answer, right? And so all we're doing is looking to develop tools to help answer that question in a very robust, comparable, consistent way. That's all this is how healthy are our soils? And that's kind of how I started my presentation. And that's as simple as it gets. But we need to be able to, as I said, button up some of the ways in which we're, sampling, reporting, comparing, benchmarking, accounting for those local differences to give us a really, trusted picture of soil health. So that's, yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that's been said. And I think the leadership of the Soil Conservation Council is paramount to being able to achieve some of these objectives in Canada. And we wouldn't be able to do it without some of our leading researchers in this country, like Dr. Biswas and Dr. Shanoff. So,
Asim, on this point of making something that is usable, that is repeatable, that is something people can count on. There's a question here. Erica asks in the Q&A about the increase in biological products, and they're being sold and farmers are using them. Does having a way to measure soil health having a standard way to measure soil health, does it inform being able to better assess what products or management practices farmers should be using? Do we see that as a down the road goal of something like having a standard?
I think standard will use as a tool to go there, but that decision making, it requires that additional work. But again, the way we see the standard again, so if you add a biological product and if you don't add it in terms of the change of this condition, and how do you know that the data set we get from a used product versus non-used product or non-used land or data, how do you compare them? As long we have a consistent way of measuring that impact. So then only we'll be able to say that biologically, use of that biological in soil and their impact on the soil health development or others. So here we really think about how to make that journey so that it's consistent and repeatable so that everybody, all the data sets are coming that we can compare to. We'll be able to say, is it really helping to help develop or enhance soil health or it's not? But if the two measurements done completely differently in different lab and not following that in a same consistent like a protocol, we won't be able to say that. How do we know that they are not just a measurement variability is big enough to talk about the treatment variability? That's something we really want to see. So that to reduce that measurement variability, a consistent way like a standard or a protocol could help us telling that, oh no, we measure in the same way. Now the impact you would see is due to the use of your biological and not use of your biological.
Now, there's a few technical questions, Anna Maria, that I do want to touch on. But I do want to sort of build off of, Jeff had talked about the different classifications of our soil, what has created our soil. Some soils have inherent limitations that aren't about health, they're just about their physical or chemical properties. So we have that classification, but clearly it doesn't fully tell the whole story. So that classification is obviously still useful, but this to me is we're adding like this other whole level of data and et cetera. But I mean, obviously the classification is still useful. So how do these two sort of fit together, I guess is the question.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I might pass it along to Dr. Biswas. But the way I look at it is, we're adding another layer of information about those soil types. So number one is knowing what kind of soil you're looking at, and then number two is conducting all of these measurements to say, okay, in the context of this soil type, is how am I doing? How am I benchmarking against this soil type? And I think that benchmarking element is really important to be able to really determine, okay, where am I on the scale of good or not so good in terms of soil health? So, Dr. Biswas, I don't know if you
I,
probably have a
I,
more
I-
scientific way of explaining that.
yeah, no, I tried to probably simpler way. So it's just the capacity and the capacity to function. So when we are looking at that, we must separate the inherent baseline. Like, yes, this soil, when you look at the capability of the soil, based the texture, mineralogy, and all those aspects, from the dynamic management response part, which is the organic carbon structure and other performance characteristics, from the seasonal and weather noise as well. So we have to have that different level. We have the soil's capacity and then capacity to function a particular one in the realm of weather management and other. So this different tiered approach, if we take, then only we will be able to identify. But we are not forgetting that classification. We know that this soil, what is there, we cannot change that. But on top of that, how this is performing to solve a particular work, this is what we're trying to quantify through this approach, more consistent work.
All,
And
all the
oh,
soil, all the soil survey and soil classification data that was collected, boots on the ground,
Right.
1960s, 70s, and 80s, has been incredibly valuable in developing all sorts of land use planning, information systems, and I see a bright future in being able to add to that database through the kinds of soil health assessment data that will be collected from various regions across Canada in the future.
I think Paul commented on that. I respond is spot on. We cannot avoid that with the data set about the classification, about the capability we develop. That's very critical. On top of that, we're creating that another layer, as Anna Maria was mentioning.
now, Anna Maria, there's also quite a few questions on ISO, on how this dovetails into maybe on the carbon credit side, so beyond, actionable items that a farmer might, ask for some of these tests and be able to measure and track their soil health. Are there other applications of having a standardized soil health test that this could lead to or will help with?
Yeah, I mean, for example, the first connection, and I think it's already been noted, but it's the connection to regenerative agriculture. And there are obviously soil health is one kind of objective within the regenerative agriculture scheme as you're trying to improve the health of your soil. So having a really good sense of how to measure soil health could be really useful in determining, okay, how am I doing in terms of my regenerative agriculture practices? So that might be one. Of course, when we're talking about soil health, the question of soil organic carbon always comes up because this is directly linked to carbon markets and the need to provide high quality data to be able to quantify how much carbon is sequestered in the soil. I would say that would be a separate standards undertaking. So being able to define a methodology to measure soil organic carbon and to be able to use that in carbon sequestration kind of methodologies for carbon accounting, that's a separate standards gap in my view. Of course, soil organic carbon, as has already been mentioned on this call, would be included in kind of the data set that's needed as part of soil health testing. But the how to collect the data, like what level of detail do you need and how you're measuring it, et cetera, like that would be, I would say, a separate standard specifically on that topic. And then I think I saw another question in the chat regarding ISO TC 347. So for folks who are not familiar as to what that stands for, that's a technical committee under the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. And TC 347 looks at data-driven agri-food systems. So specifically standardizing, how we're collecting and using data in agriculture and agri-food. So looking at soil health data, that would be kind of one element or one use case, let's say, within that ISO TC 347 umbrella. And, CSA Group is directly involved in the work of ISO TC 347. We manage Canada's Mirror Committee, so we enable Canadian experts to participate in international standard setting. And if there is a desire to leverage Canadian standards and, bring them up to an international level of standardization, CSA can be a conduit for that type of work. But I think first step is national standards, and then we go from there.
I would be remiss, Susie, if we didn't touch on the privacy and the other aspect of this that has been brought up in the context of having a national soil health strategy. On whenever we talk data collection, there's always that question of privacy, or how will that data be used? Could it be used against me? This is a question that comes up. We certainly hear it from the RealAg audience of I want this to benefit me. I want healthy soil, but I'm a little concerned about the privacy side. Susie, how do you answer that question as far as whether or not this is, potentially a privacy risk, or how that gets managed?
I think it's less of a risk and more of a concern in terms of those whose data is shared. And I've had a lot of experience starting with animal livestock traceability and, the concerns about how the data can be used. So from my perspective, I think that there's a couple of issues. One is we talk about it, but we haven't done anything about it yet in terms of data governance. What is it that makes farm level data valuable? And how does that value accrue to the farmer or the rancher, and not to, those that are collecting the data either by machine methods? Farmers aren't particularly concerned about researchers leaking their data or using their data wrong. They are concerned about governments. That's their major concern. So I think when developing any kind of discussion in terms of future direction, whether it's not in developing the standard itself, but it could be in the utilization of that standard. So that needs to be part of it, is how do you share that data? And who does that data belong to? And that can create some barriers, but it's a hard discussion, but you really have to have that discussion. And what are the tools to give the providers of the data the confidence they want? And when you go out and talk to farmers that are providing their data and say, well, there's protections. Yeah, right. So there's a lot of skepticism out there. And I think we need to have a real honest conversation. And this is not just for soil health. This is across the whole spectrum. We need to have a real solid discussion about what does this mean? It's the same as the kind of discussions that are going on with artificial intelligence, because the more advanced the data management tools become, the more concern is sometimes generated about misuse of that data. So I would think that an overall, and maybe this is a good opportunity for CAPI to have another webinar on how does artificial intelligence intersect with the protection of data collection from the agriculture sector. Love to see that. So I think it's a bigger problem. My experience in working on standards is that this is anything that's involving data, it's front and foremost in terms of consideration in the standards development. But I think we have to do a lot of outreach in terms of that. And it's even on the utilization of what the standards are. My experience too, when we were doing the code of practice at the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Crops, is that there is a perception that if there is a standard, then it will be used to the disadvantage. Mm-hmm. It can be used to the disadvantage and not the advantage. Example. So you have a standard for soil health testing. How does this implicate the farmers that are working with a buyer in terms of what that buyer is demanding from them? That may not be the intention at all. It may not have those implications, but without addressing directly those types of implications, then there is a tendency to be concerned that standardization basically means the floor, upping the floor, without any benefits coming back. So I would suggest that as CSA moves forward with their with this development of soil measurement, that a part of the work be concerned about how this could potentially be perceived and mitigate those risks by having a discussion.
Mm-hmm. Now I see Elise she's given us the old shepherd's crook across the neck, but I've got one last one because Jay Wetter, you get a gold star for this. What would Les Henry do? Dr. Shano, what indeed would Les Henry do? I would love to hear your thoughts, Jeff, for on that idea of exactly that, to round this out, the thoughts on exactly that, closing it out on soil health.
Yeah, well, I think that Les would look at this objectively, and he would say, just as Susie's pointed out, we need to make this as a step in the right direction. There's obviously some gains to be made here, some advances, but we also need to look carefully at what some of the negatives are and make sure that we address those equally as carefully as we look towards all the good things that this could do.
Thank you, Jeff. That, Jeff. I remember all those days. Yes.
You remember less, yeah.
Yes, we do. Very fondly. All right, Elise, I'll say thank you to the panel. Thank each of you for your time and your expertise and your thoughts. Really appreciate it. And I'll hand it back to Elise.
Perfect. Thanks, Lindsay. And thank you to all the panelists and for sharing your perspectives and knowledge in this engaging discussion. I've been on all of CAPI's webinars, and this is one of the top engaging discussions and so many questions from the Q&A. So we really appreciate that. I want to give a special thank you to CSA Group for collaborating on this CAPI RealAg policy exchange and for contributing to the event's success. And stay tuned again for our next policy webinar next month in response to the FBT minister's policy statement. And I want you to enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thank you for attending.